Thank you for watching Conscious Consumer Network. The live stream broadcast is free to view. You can pause and rewind live broadcasts to catch up, or view shows at a later date by accessing our free archives of all shows. Check out our broadcast guide to see what's on. You can show your support by donating to our network support fund. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, or subscribe to the monthly newsletter for updates. We thank you for supporting free and independent media.
This is For the Love of Learning, Voices of the Alternative Education Movement. Be inspired by the voices of visionaries, changemakers, and ordinary, extraordinary people who do what they do, all for the love of learning.
This is For the Love of Learning, Voices of the Alternative Education Movement. I'm Lainey Liberty, and this is episode number 101. In this episode, we're going to explore the world of slow homeschooling. What is slow homeschooling? The general idea is don't overschedule, prioritize free time as well as time outside, time together as a family. It is from these spaces that the really juicy fruits of having your kid out of school come, and slowing it down a notch seems to be rarer and rarer, even if the benefits of nature, sleeping in, etc., are being studied and empirically shown. We'll go a step further and say we don't think that they're just benefits, but just the natural way children are. And if we allow them time and freedom, they know what to do with their time and freedom. School, while it's the norm, really isn't. And it's not a child's natural path to growing and becoming who they are. So we've got a lot to talk about in the world of slow homeschooling. So let's jump right in. I'm going to first read each of our panelists' bios, but I want to remind our audience that you can find out more about each of our participants on the show notes page located at consciousconsumernetwork.tv, and look for the show notes page for episode number 101. There you will find more information about each of our panelists, links to their projects and websites. So tonight's first guest is Milva. Milva is the mother of 4 amazing adult children, all of whom were homeschooled through most of their child and teenage years. She started homeschooling in 1991 after reading an essay by John Taylor Gatto and realizing school and the PTA weren't for her. For 3 decades, she worked for the Boston Globe and Boston.com, writing and reporting about arts and cultural events in Boston. She was also an active member in her homeschool support group, organizing field trips, potlucks, play readings, and creative writing groups. In 2003, she was the co-founder of Advocates for Home Education in Massachusetts, a nonprofit organization that supports homeschooling families in the Bay State. She blogs at apotlucklife.com, and in 2017, she and Sophia, who is also on this panel tonight, co-authored Unschoolers, a work of fiction about the day-to-day lives of families in a homeschooling support group. So welcome to tonight's panel, Milva.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Next, I'd like to introduce Sophia, who was just mentioned in Milva's bio. So Sophia is a librarian and a mother of 2 adult children, now 27 and 24, neither of whom attended school until college. She stumbled upon John Holt's Teach Your Own at the library in 1991. Holt's description of how children actively explore their world and their desire to fit in, take part, and do right meshed with her own observations of her then 2-year-old, and the other toddlers she knew through her work as a lay breastfeeding counselor. She and her husband made the decision to forego school and keep doing what they were doing, and they didn't look back. An active local homeschool group member for many years, she threw herself into a number of organizing roles: newsletter treasurer, occasional editor, e-list moderator, field trip organizer, and so on. In 2003, she co-founded Advocates for Home Education in Massachusetts, a nonprofit that educates and supports families who are interested in or actively homeschooling. In 2017, she and Milva released the fictional book, Unschoolers, about their daily lives of several interconnected families in a homeschool support group. You know, we're going to have to talk about this on the show. Welcome to tonight's panel, Sophia.
Thank you, Lainey. I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, we're so happy you're with us. Next, I'd like to introduce Sheila. Sheila's been on the show before, and she also is an author of 2 fiction books, Cellular Spirits and Miss Crazy, as well as a nonfiction book that explains unschooling to concerned friends and family. Dear Grandma, your grandkids are unschoolers. Actually, we talked about this quite a bit on the Unschooler author panel that we had a couple months ago. So if you're interested, I would urge everybody to look in our archives for the show. Sheila is a mom, grandmother, author, and unschooling advocate living in Pennsylvania with her 17 and 19-year-old sons, as well as a grown daughter who is a single mom to a 5-year-old and 3-year-old boys. Neither her children nor her grandchildren have ever been schooled. Welcome to tonight's panel, Sheila.
Hi, I'm glad to be here.
We're happy you're back too. Next, I'd like to introduce Marie. Marie is a writer interested in topics ranging from radical economics to archaeology and philosophy of ancient Greece. She is, or has been, an archaeologist, a teacher, an activist, a scientist, a homesteader, an unschooling mother of 2, a PhD student, an art exhibition coordinator, a potter, a student of permaculture and herbalism, a mentor, a community organizer, a backpacker in Asia, and both an editor as well as a writer. She works with author-philosopher Charles Eisenstein and is currently researching and writing her first work of fiction. You can read some of her work at her personal blog, Personal Mycology, and the links are on our website. So welcome back, Marie. You were on our show 2 years ago.
I was, and thank you for having me back again.
You're very welcome. And finally, I'd like to welcome Sabrina back to the show, who also was on the show 2 years ago. Meet Sabrina, matriarch of an unschooling and world schooling family. Following the birth of their daughters, Sabrina and Doug felt compelled to slowly overhaul their lives, changing which felt both radical from a mainstream lifestyle and completely natural to their newly found perspectives. Their hope to spend more time bonding together as a family, enjoying time from big adventures to simple pleasures, and discovering themselves on their passions. The journey to this lifestyle has meant thinking outside of the box on work, housing, learning, parenting, and life. Their path continues to reveal itself as they live, but as for taking the leap, they've never looked back. Fresh off of a year as digital nomads, traveling around North America, Sabrina and her family currently co-work and co-learn with their daughter from their new home base at the Jersey Shore. So welcome to tonight's show, Sabrina. I'm so happy you're back with us.
Thank you. Me too. I'm really excited for tonight's conversation.
Well, why don't we start the conversation then with you? After reading your bio, being a traveler and being on the road in the United States for a year, it gives you time to slow down. So I would think naturally as a traveler, this would be something that you can talk about with a fresh experience. And I'd like if you can share what the discovery, first of all, what slow learning means and is and what it looks like to you, and then how you eased into it. And maybe it wasn't the travel lifestyle, maybe it was something before. So the floor is yours.
Thanks. Yeah, it's interesting. When I think about slow learning, to me, that's almost interchangeable with the concept of slow living, because I'm looking at learning and living as so intertwined. It's hard to kind of parse those out. The journey for us to live slowly and again, then learn slowly kind of came out of this desire to have time to breathe and reflect about life in general, kind of one of those moments. I don't know that we had one particular defining moment, but a lot of moments along the way before we started making significant changes in our lives where there were moments to reflect and say, is this the life we want to be leading? Is this, is this going are we doing the things we want to be doing? And is this really what life is all about? Are we going to get to the end of our lives and say, great, we did our work and we retired and we checked all the boxes. And so we started saying, really the question was changing. It was more, are we leading a life that we're really happy with? Are we leading a life where we can dive in as much as, explore out? So deep and wide we were looking for. So that led to slow living, and then having our daughter naturally led to slow learning as well.
Sabrina, did you start this lifestyle before your daughter was born?
Right as she was born. So I think for me, this was kind of also tuning into my inner voice, which is, my instinct, that really strong voice that we all have inside of us that tells us, do this, don't do this, go this way. What about this? That I realized I kind of had the volume down on that a lot. And there were maybe a few moments in my life where the volume was turned up, or I listened to it a little bit more. But when I was pregnant with my daughter, that's when that voice was kind of pounding at my door and saying, hey, you've really got to pay attention to me. So I tuned in more, and that led to this, which kind of cascaded. The direction that we wanted to go, we knew once she was born, but then how do we go in that direction? What led to a lot of soul searching. So that the quest was a little bit more murky than I know what needs to change.
Well, I'm glad that you listened to your intuition, and I know we've got a lot to talk about tonight, and I'm really happy that you're part of the panel. So I'd like to invite Sheila to go ahead and share with us also what slow learning means to you and how that's a part of your life. You've got a full house full of kids and adults.
Well, I like what Sabrina said about how each of us, it's important for each of us to decide what we want for our lives and to build our life around what each of us wants. And I think, school does a really good job of training people for corporate America. And, you think of how someone in corporate America, they'll get up, sometimes they'll wake up stressed already, and they'll gulp down their coffee, they'll make sure their kids are rushed out the door, drop them off at school, deal with traffic, go to work for long hours, sometimes 12-hour days, come home, and if they're lucky, have, time to briefly watch a kid's soccer game and then rush them through dinner, rush them through bedtime, rush them through homework, and then get them to bed so they can get up and do it all over in the morning. And, sometimes we're asked, if your kids aren't forced to go to school, then how will they have the discipline to get up and go to a job they don't want to go to in the morning? And I always say, well, I don't want them to get up and go to a job they don't want to go to in the morning. It doesn't mean that they're not going to have the discipline to do what they want to do, to make what they want to happen in their lives. But it has to be what they want. What kind of lifestyle do we want to live? And then let's build our life around that. So, for me, I think that slow is going to vary based on every family. What's slow for me might be fast for someone else. What's fast for me might be slow for someone else. And it varies not just by family, but by child. One child might like a busier calendar than another child, but it's individual. It's what does each person want.
And actually, you bring up a really good point with multiple children, and you've got 3 generations in your house now.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about what it means to have everybody's needs met in terms of the speed and lifestyle that and cooperation, collaboration, what that looks like?
Yeah, well, I think it involves a lot of trust. It means, quieting all the shoulds that we have in our mind. We all have so many tapes probably playing in our heads that we got from school and from very mainstream upbringing sometimes that tell us our kids should do this, our kids should do this, and our kids should do this. Instead of saying, well, if this child really likes to stay home and do his own thing, that's okay. And if this child likes to be, out doing things with friends every single day, that's okay. Just trust. So I have my 2 sons who are 17 and 19 are very much homebodies. They don't like to travel a lot. They don't like to, they like things quiet. And I just trust that, and it's nice because we just got a new puppy and she's a 12-week-old St. Bernard. And my daughter and I, yes, she's going to be like 150 pounds, but right now she's little. And it's nice because my daughter and I, who's in her 20s, and her kids, we really like to travel. So, and we do a lot. We don't travel far, we travel within a few states, we don't go to Mexico or far places right now. We'd like to, but we can do lots of day trips, lots of overnight trips, and then come home to our puppy. And it's okay that the boys the little ones just like to go. They just like to go, 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 go. And the older ones just like to be quiet at home. They're the ones who are watching the puppy while we're out. And it all works together really nice. I think because we just trust that what's right for each person is honored. And we don't force someone to do, to live a lifestyle that isn't right for them.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you. And I know we're going to talk more about trust too. So yeah, lots of great points. Marie, go ahead and share with us what slow homeschooling or learning looks like to you and why it's a part of your life.
Yeah, I really wanted to honor the idea of quieting those shoulds, and also to talk a little bit more about what Sabrina said about the idea that you have this voice that gets really insistent. And I think we spend a lot of time in our culture pushing that voice down and ignoring it because it's not logical or scientific. And everything in our culture is telling us that we need to produce and we need to make money and we need to do more for more people and for more things in our lives to create. And that if we haven't created by the time we're 30 or 40 or 50, that we've somehow lost at life, right? And I think that we push that insistent voice down at our peril. And I know that in my life, before children, while my children were small, and now again, as they're teens and tweens, I have a 14-year-old, almost 15-year-old, and an 11-year-old. That voice has come knocking several times. And each time for whatever reason, for different reasons, I listened to it eventually. Sometimes I pushed it away for a while because it was inconvenient to listen to the voice, right? But each time it had something very important to say to me about stopping and slowing down and looking at my life and looking at my children and their needs in a new and different way. And each time I listened to the voice, I was able to honor more deeply something that was going on in either my life or my children's life in a very profoundly important way. And so I think that for me, that voice that Sabrina mentioned and the quieting the shoulds, they're related. And that it's the key to actually living this life and not and walking without fear that you're going to fail. Because really, as long as you have love in your life and your children have, interests and or are thinking and seem to be interested in parts of the world in some way, shape, or form, you haven't lost in any way. And you just have to stop thinking about what our culture is telling you should achieve. So that's for me.
Yeah, you actually outlined my personal story. I resonate so much with what you're saying, Marie. And yeah, a little bit later I'll share my process of sort of deschooling too, but it was deschooling with this idea of if you don't produce, if you're not productive, if you're not reaching a goal, and if you're being lazy, you're worthless. And so that was like a huge one for me. And I see how that affected all the different parts of my life. I'm so honored and thrilled that I'm here with a panel that you guys get it. You're talking about it and you're doing it and you're bringing it to your children. And that's amazing. So thank you, Marie. And Milva, I'm going to go ahead and invite you to share, what slow learning means to you and why that's a part of your whole educational philosophy.
Well, I started, my oldest daughter is 32 and my youngest is 18. So when I started homeschooling in 1991, the landscape was a lot different. And what I see now, I see a lot of an inclination to overschedule. There's so much to sign up for, and people, because of the pressures that the other panelists have talked about, they feel like they need to do that. When I started, it wasn't even an option. We didn't have all those things to sign up for. So it was, I feel like I was lucky. So that's kind of how I found this lifestyle. But I think as far as slow learning, I think what Sheila said about just honoring each individual and going at each individual's pace is really the essence of it. So sometimes the learning looks slow and sometimes it's really fast because nothing is really linear the way a lot of people tend to think it is. It's up and down and there's bursts and the thing when you slow down and you don't overschedule and you relax, to me, one of the greatest benefits of that is that you get to really observe your children and you get to really know them really well and you get to watch them sort of unfold, and it's amazing. And if you're sort of running around all day and going from this activity to that activity or signing them up and dropping them off, then you miss the opportunity to just be with them and watch them become who they are. And so I find that to be one of the greatest gifts of this homeschooling lifestyle.
Yeah, and you touched on something really important. It's the fact that as an adult, as a parent, if you're frazzled and trying to meet your kids' schedules too, you're not present for them either. And so, that's huge. You didn't exactly say that, but you alluded to it. So I think it's really, really important. And I actually do want to talk a little bit more about what being present with your children looks like when we have a conversation a little bit further. But before we do, I'd love to turn the floor over to Sophia. Sophia, I'd love to hear from you. What is slow learning for you, and what does that look like in your family?
I resonate a lot with what everyone else has said. I think to put it in pretty simple terms, I think the idea of having the time for the children and the parents together is what allows you to see your children and get to know them. And then that's why you can trust them. And it sort of all feeds onto itself, so that when you know your children and you trust them and that they're going to learn stuff or whatever, then you can relax more as a parent. Because I think there is a lot of pressure on parents, especially when you're deciding to homeschool or unschool and take it on yourself. Or it's a kind of weird thing to do. Are you doing the right thing? And so when you get to take the time to really see what happens with children, it can make you maybe be a little less anxious about the path, because you can see how amazing they are. So, I mean, that's that. A lot of what Milva said, because we've had similar experiences of just not. I think that what happens now, which I see a lot talking to new people, is that there's so many opportunities in the world to sign up for things and pay for things, and what you end up doing, or is easy to do, is you think, oh, this is all these opportunities. I'll bring my kid here and drop them off here and sign them up for this thing, and you're not getting to spend that time with them, and they're not getting just free time and downtime, which is kind of what it's just really valuable. I think it's just it's this underlying thing that doesn't really get talked about when everyone starts talking about value of education and all this stuff, is just how amazing time to do whatever happens, maybe daydream, is really for children. So I don't know if that was coherent, but that's kind of what I'm thinking when I think of slow homeschooling, just taking time to be together and watch everybody and trust each other.
Yeah, it was absolutely coherent. I do want to thank you publicly for writing the introduction to this show. So that was your writing, and it was your description about slow learning, and I want to give you credit for that. One of the things that you wrote in the introduction was, I'm paraphrasing, but in your mind, school doesn't give the ability for children to become who they are, and not having those schedules. I mean, it opens up the opportunities for them to actually grow into the people that they need, that they're meant to grow into. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I don't think I actually said that school doesn't let them. I don't really have the experience. My kids didn't go to school. So, but I think that for me, that was all part of that feedback loop, seeing one of them or both of them, whatever, get interested in something, and then seeing where that led to, and how they processed it and what they took away from it. And it was usually something that I would never have taken away from it. And I just came to really respect that they were on their own path, going somewhere that it would be really presumptuous of me to think that I knew where that was, or that I could tell them anything better about themselves than they really knew. I mean, of course, I'm their parent. I have more experience. I know kind of how the world works, and I can help them figure that stuff out. But in terms of figuring out who they are going to be, they were very good at that themselves. And I also think that because I went to school, they're better at a lot of stuff than me, because they really don't have that whole way of looking at learning that I learned, that you learn something for the test, then you forget it, or just, all the stuff that anyone who went to school will know. I don't have to go through it all. They just didn't ever get that. And it's very refreshing, and it has served them very well as adults too. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I want to ask a question to the panel. I'm just going to open it up, and whoever wants to answer it can answer it. The question is about slow homeschooling or slow home education and schedules. And we touched on that, actually. Sophia, you just touched on that a little bit. Milva, you touched on it too with the overscheduling. But how do you find the balance between not only the child's schedule, but the schedule and rhythm of the family and the needs and schedule and desires of the, the parent and the child. So if anybody would like to just open up their mic and talk about balancing schedules and still honoring being present and the slow education that we're talking about, go ahead. Floor is yours.
I can talk a little bit about this. We do a lot of talking about how everybody's schedule will affect everybody else's schedule. And this includes my husband and his work and my work. I work at home and have a job. And my children, when they add activities, we have kind of a powwow about how are we going to fit this all in? And before they add activities, we really do a lot of discussing about whether this is something that has been sitting with them for a while. Is it something they want to pursue long term? When they were younger, my son would go, I want drums. I want to learn to do drums. And I would just jump through every hoop to make sure he had like a drumming teacher, and we would buy him drums, or we would find somebody who had them, and we would, listen to drums on the radio, and I would just pound him with like all of this information, and then he would just give it up, right? And so I learned that this was overwhelm and unnecessary, and that I wasn't actually listening to what they need and what they have to say about the subject, and in my sort of over enthusiasm to try and provide. This is my own schooling and my own process that I had to get through. So now we just do a lot of talking about it. So when my daughter came to me this year and said, I want to learn the violin, we talked about it. We talked about it for a month. We talked about, what kind of lessons would she like? Who might she, does she want a woman or a man? We went through the process. We asked friends, and it took a few months to integrate her now new violin lessons and the violin practicing into our schedule. And it's not something we took on lightly. Even something as simple as playing the violin changes the dynamic of the way the house works. And so we really do a lot of thinking and talking about that as a unit, and that's how we navigate
it. With our schedule, we find that we're rarely in a state where something is set and we think we've got it. Now we're good. We've got our schedule. It's constantly dynamic. We're adjusting to kind of the seasons of our life or of our family with regard to just needs, wants, interests that are new, or specifically even those needs that we pick up on just in family conversations, that, maybe now we just want some more time to rest and just be. Maybe now we want some more time to go out and do things. So, we can kind of, I think one of the joys of this lifestyle is that we can shape our schedule based on what our family kind of needs in that season of our life. And it is always interesting, as a kind of an aside to that, whenever I'm talking to someone about our lifestyle and our learning approach, I'll often get the question of, what do you do during the day? Or, is there even the socialization question that always comes up? And it's, now that I've been around the block enough to answer it, I'm like, how is that question still being asked? But for some people, I'm, one of the first people they're meeting. So that question is coming up. And what I find is that the thing I keep referring to is I could pack my schedule 3 times over, so like triple book every day, and still not experience everything that's being offered in this area. So that, for some people who are who know nothing about homeschooling, they think, wow, that's great, because the abundance in our culture means good, and for some people who are homeschooling, they don't have access to that many opportunities. And so they think, how can I create some of that? Or how can I find some of that? And so, as we were talking about schedules are just about what that looks like for a school. Having an abundance, kind of has, I think, in some ways led many people to seek out minimizing their life through their schedule, their things, and kind of looking at what does an abundance of time look like? What does an abundance of relationships look like, more than extracurriculars or things like that, or stuff that we collect that in the name of learning or because we should. So yeah, I think they leave us with bigger questions, but in short, this schedule can really be flexible to match wherever your family's at, and I think that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I think the flexibility that you just talked about, Sabrina, and the negotiation that Marie referred to are pretty essential. But I also think that part of the picture is that as kids get older and they become more independent, they make their own schedules. That's been my experience anyway. So when they're little, it's easy. You're kind of they're coming with you and you're all doing stuff together, and then they start getting interests. But when you raise kids this way, they learn to be independent, and they have maybe a better idea than some of us schooled adults of knowing what they want and what they're interested in. And so, when my third child was born, my son was a teenager and he was figuring out his own stuff. I mean, I was busy with an infant, and he got himself this internship that he wanted to do. He got himself there. He would just hand me these papers and say, could you sign these? Because the museum where he was interning needed this paperwork, and I just said sure and signed it. So there's definitely a lot of, there's definitely communication that's important, but as kids get older, when they've been raised this way, they tend to have a lot of independence, and that makes scheduling a lot easier because they handle their own lives.
Milva, you brought up you brought up again the same thing that Sheila was talking about, and that's utilizing trust in the process. And I see that as a theme throughout everything that everybody's talking about so far. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what it feels like to trust the process while you're in it. And maybe for those of us that were not unschooled or home educated or self-directed learners, what that sort of deschooling looks like in our own heads.
Well, it's definitely a challenge. It can be. You're looking at your kid and you want to make sure you're doing a good job. Every parent feels that way. So if your child isn't reading when the culture says they're supposed to read, or in my case, I had a kid who didn't write very much at all until he was in double digits, like 12. I had another child who at the age of 12 couldn't spell. And I started looking at it going, oh geez, what are we going to do about this? But it ended up fine. She started playing Scrabble. Whether that fixed it or not, I don't know. Or she just grew out of it. So the thing is, when you've observed this, this is part of why it's great to be around other families with older kids, because then you can see how it works with other kids. You can see, you can hear the stories of other parents. You can hear the stories about how they let their kids explore their interests, and you can watch this unfolding that was amazing, that watch this interest that seemed like it was nothing big, like maybe somebody was obsessed with basketball cards and then it turns into a business, or they learn statistics from it, and so you start to witness this in other kids, and I think that helps with trusting for your own kids, but I think you just have to sort of pay attention. The paying attention, I think Sophia said earlier, that when you're paying attention, you can see. So even if they're not writing the way, school says they should be writing, you know that they're reading these amazing books, and you know that they're getting all the tools together that will allow them to write later. I've done creative writing groups with homeschoolers, so I've watched a lot of kids develop their writing skills, and that's actually a really great way for them to do it. But it's everybody's so different. So, and that's actually another great thing is if you volunteer in your homeschooling community and you do something with the kids, then you see how every kid is different, and you can watch how all these kids, not just your own, learn in different ways, and that also helps to trust. And to me, that's another great thing about homeschooling, is that it's not only that I've gotten to see my own kids grow up and learn all these different things, I've seen all these kids in my homeschooling community. So for me, I know that this works. I know that kids will learn, and that if your kid's not reading when they're 6, it's not that big of a deal. So I feel like that's probably a huge piece, is just paying attention not just to your own kids, but to other kids and seeing what's possible.
Yeah, I think it's really important too to learn not to compare your kids to not just what mainstream society might say for them, but also to other homeschoolers' kids, because we might see, that genius homeschooler who, started reading Lord of the Rings as their first book, and they just wowed everyone at, or they're starting college courses when they're 12 or something crazy like that. And we have to watch, not only comparing our kids, though, I think academically, but their personalities and what they like to do in their spare time. There's kids who are just very outgoing and who like to do, maybe unschooling conferences, who just love unschooling conferences. That was one thing for me. I have a very quiet son, and when I was considering my first unschooling conference, I would go on message boards and say, I don't know if he's going to like it. And everyone would be like, oh, he will. And my gut said, no, he's not going to like this. And I took him anyway, even though he said, I just want to stay home. I said, no, the other unschooled kids like this. You would like this too. And so to remember that your kid is okay, no matter who he is, no matter what he's like, it's just okay. I noticed just trusting kids, like when we go to places like children's museums, I notice a lot, like the school groups will rush the kids through. They have 5 minutes in every section. And sometimes we'll go to a children's museum and they will go to the first exhibit and get so into things that they will be there for, 45 minutes. And, there was a time when my natural tendency might have been, there are 3 floors to this museum. We have to see everything. We have to do everything. We have to get it all in. But no, they're happy playing in this little thing with marbles or whatever for 45 minutes before they move on, and that's okay. I've learned to just go and buy a membership to that museum and take them back some other time to see all the rest of the parts. And, same thing if you're just going for a walk. If you walk for 2 minutes and then they find a mud puddle and they're happy in that mud puddle for half an hour, you can go to walk again another time. It's just trusting and not comparing, like all the other kids who go to this children's museum do all these things. And why aren't you? Why are you just playing with marbles the whole time? So trust, again, just comes up for the whole deschooling process. So your child is okay, no matter who they are or what they like to do.
I love that sort of the quantity, even compared to the the quality versus the quantity piece, where are we doing it all, or are we the amount that we're doing, are we doing it well or deep? Because obviously nowadays there's so much access to so many things that when we think about limiting the exposure to a certain siloed subjects that or even in experiences, saying I could access this whole, impressive museum, but, diving in, that's, there's sort of a savoring there. But when I think about trust, I also think about where that doubt comes from. Is it coming from internally? Is it coming from a larger questioning? Because when we look at the history of organized schooling and public schooling, it's more recent than, we've been learning and educating ourselves for so long over, the course of human history, and the way we've been operating in terms of teacher and student classrooms. That's so relatively new that the trust, to me, feels almost like it just seems interesting compared to the history of, just how short in human history public schooling or schooling has been around. And when we think about that voice, I also think about I feel even more at ease when we are moving slower and we're watching and learning from each other and seeing that that my daughter has the ability to be a teacher to others, a teacher to me, that I can be a teacher, which is not a role I'd ever seen for myself before. But the idea that, teachers that everyone and everything can sort of be a teachable moment, that can kind of get blurred the faster we're moving, and the more we're taking in, the less time we have to process everything. But when we are moving slowly and we kind of see all that beauty in the small moments, or diving in deeper, that's when I think a lot of that clarity comes out, that there's no room for my doubt. My doubt is dispelled by the fact that I'm looking at my, at my daughter as a teacher in this moment, or as me feeling empowered as a teacher, or just seeing life itself unfold and teaching us beautiful things. So I think the slowness sort of removes some of that doubt and enhances some of that trust.
I really agree with that the slowness allows you to reconnect with the trust. And that's why that when you were talking about, Sabrina, about the voice that keeps insisting and coming back and talking to you and saying, slow down, why it's really important to heed it. And sometimes it comes in moments that are unexpected. So I have a story. Like I said, I have a 14-year-old and 11-year-old, and my daughter has always been extremely resistant to learning to read. She just refused when she was younger, 5 or 6, to even listen to stories. Like most kids like to listen to stories. She wouldn't even want to sit and listen to us read to her. She's very artistic. She wanted to draw. She wanted to look at pictures, but she wasn't really interested in reading. And my son picked up reading very easily and not really early, but just kind of, 6, 7 years old. And so, you make these assumptions that you just trust that it's going to happen because it happened with one child one way. It's probably going to happen the same way. But of course, that's not what happens when you see that your children are completely individual. And so all through this time, I'm an unschooler, and I was like, it'll be fine. I trust. I really do trust. And then, so she's 10 years old, and my husband was in a really bad motorcycle accident. He almost died. And this was in the fall of November of 2015. And everything was just about him and getting him healed, right? And I was just trying to carry on with life and pay bills and help my husband heal and doing my work and activism. And I just kind of trusted that my kids were going to be fine, that, we were doing just what we'd always been doing. And one night my daughter came to me and she started crying, and she said, Mom, my friends, it's because I can't read. My friends who go to school say I'm stupid, and I'm stupid, and I want to learn to read. And I feel like I'm not getting enough of your attention. And this was one of those moments that slapped me in the back of the head. Like, you have got to slow down. You have got to stop. And so I literally quit. I was running 2 nonprofits and doing all of this organization work. And I just literally the next day, I quit everything except for my family and my work. Because we only had one income at the time, and I really needed to keep my work going. And I really listened to it. And it was one of those moments where I had just trusted that everything was going to be fine. And it began, something had happened. She had grown aware of how our culture perceives her as a late reader, and it was beginning to affect her self-esteem. And so, yes, you should absolutely trust your children, but you always need to keep an eye on how they're feeling about their relationship to the rest of the world. And because it's taken a long time for us to figure out how to repair that self-esteem damage. And now she's reading, and literally, I mean, we just buckled down, and she's like, I want to learn to read, and we did it together. But it really required me taking a step back from my life and slowing it down. And again, it was one of those moments. So I just wanted to add that story at this point.
Marie, thanks for that story. What I'm glad to hear about that she felt comfortable, coming to you and telling her telling you her insecurities, and you're responding to them. That definitely counts for a lot. I mean, that's, to me, the biggest thing really of having this time with our kids is just being able to have these relationships with them. And that's also reminded me of something back when Milva was talking about the groups. I feel with other people's kids, I think that's another thing that maybe people still do it, but when we were homeschooling, in the olden days now, we really had to do that. There weren't all these other things that you could sign your kids up for. And I think that on so many levels, it's a valuable thing to do because it shows your kids that you can create what you want. It means you have relationships with other children and parents in other families, and that you can share your passions with them and get to know other kids. It lets children have the opportunity to find mentors that are adults other than their parents. And so I think that it's just a cool thing. I know it takes time and it's a commitment, but it's definitely was one of the things that in my homeschooling life was the most treasured. And I think, maybe, I don't know, I don't have little kids anymore, but I feel like it's not as common as it used to be when my kids were little. I do feel very lucky that I didn't have a choice to, if I wanted them to be doing stuff, I had to make it happen with people I knew, and also not always, whoever was, there were so many fewer people homeschooling, and so, yeah, I guess Milva and I had a talk. We were talking about it. Just sometimes and also Sabrina was saying, sometimes when there's so much abundance and so much choice, it's actually maybe harder in a way. I don't know. So that's my thought.
Wow, no, that's a really good thought. And I'm finding that, listening to all of your stories, I'm reflecting on my own path, my own journey. I believe that when I introduced Sabrina, I immediately went to, okay, so you're traveling, so that makes you slow down. Then I just realized, listening to you ladies over almost the last hour, wait, that was just my path. And I guess where I'm going with this is, for me, I discovered time and ability to slow down from what the conventional life was through travel. That was my vehicle and my son's vehicle, and we've been doing it now. We're about ready to start on our 9th year, which is crazy. But that became the catalyst for all of these internal changes for us. But what that led to for me and for my son more was being present with one another. And so for me, the slowing down is directly connected to being present. And even though intellectually I felt like, okay, I was present with my son as much as I could be, but I ran a business before and I had all these scheduled things, and we had, the goals and things that we had to do. I really wasn't present, but I talked to him as if I was, but I really wasn't present. But the actual experience of being present for us, our catalyst was travel. I was wondering if people on this, if this wonderful panel could share what their process was of slowing down, and if indeed slowing down equates to being present for you in your experience, or if that was never your problem, it was just mine. So I'm just going to open up the floor and let you guys jump in.
As you're talking about travel, I definitely felt that amplified while we were traveling, that connection and that presence, a lot, because I realized there's almost this addiction to being busy, to staying busy. You feel like you're being productive. You know, I'm in the house. I've got household things to do. I'm cleaning. I'm getting stuff done. You feel good, you know, but I realized when we were traveling and everything that we had fit into the trunk of our car, and I didn't have, counters to wipe down, or the dishes were done in 2 seconds, and we all were doing it as part of a family together. You know, there was something about that really extreme minimalism in terms of the things we had and what was just on our agenda for the day, meant that there was nothing for me to busy myself with other than being together and diving in deeper. So traveling was a wonderful vehicle in that way. And traveling was also a really wonderful vehicle back to even trust, in terms of seeing other countries are approaching learning differently. It's not just one path. So, so in some places they're not even doing structured school subjects until age 7, or, all of this that kind of combines in, and you put into your head and think, this adds to trust and I'm connecting more. But yeah, there is a lot of travel is very helpful, but also just spending time outside, I have to say, was extremely helpful. We would step out the door and it was like layers of anything just kind of peeled off of us, emotions or things that I had to do. And Sheila had mentioned earlier, when you go walking with kids, kind of how they will stop and find something that's fascinating to them that we might walk right past, right? We're going point A to point B. And we were talking about how all of us happen to kind of live in the northeast of the U.S. where, at least the part I'm in, it is very busy. People they walk with a purpose. They're going someplace. And so I was doing that, and I didn't realize it until my daughter, even just walking to the car, stop and see all of these beautiful things that kind of made me slow down. And I had a choice then. Do I hurry her along, or do I say, we have time to dive in here? I want to show me the world from your point of view. And I remember making that choice. It was hard. And I remember when I was kind of doing it because I was home with my daughter, and when my husband would join us, I could see the anxiety in him, just kind of like, we have to move. We have to go faster along this path. And I'm like, good stuff's happening here. I had to kind of retrain myself to go slow, but wait, the good stuff's coming. Just wait for it. Because it can be a little bit of a culture shock to slow down and really just look at that. Look at the small details. And I saw a beautiful quote that kind of fit in with this mindset that, and I wish I knew it exactly, but paraphrasing was the idea that you can show your kids the incredible beauties of the world, the incredible things, the things that will awe them. You can, but you don't need to. They sort of speak for themselves, but it's those little things. It's the beauty in the minutia, those small things that if you can show them how amazing that is, and oftentimes they're showing us how amazing that is. They're reminding us that there's that, that's golden.
Well, one thing that has really helped me is to remember how fast time goes. As a grandmother now, and my youngest is 17. He'll be turning 18 this summer. And, it just seemed like yesterday that he was little. And I tell my daughter, all the time that, that cheesy song, maybe she thinks it's cheesy, that You're Gonna Miss This by, is it Trace Atkins? And she's like, I always sing that to her, and she's always like, Mom, but it's so true. You are going to miss this. They're not going to be little forever, and I even told my kids, the puppy that we just got, I'm all about the puppy. I said, take pictures now and play with that puppy all you can now because she's gonna be big really soon, and enjoy it now because it goes so fast. And I still have to remind myself of that, not just with the little ones, but like the other day I was working, because we have our business that we're running and out of the corporate world and doing what we love, but it's still a lot of work. And I was up late and I was working, and my son, who is 17, came up to me and he started talking to me about something that he read online, and he just started talking. It had something to do with history and politics, and he just wanted to have a conversation at 2 a.m. about this. And I was trying to get work done, and I found myself saying, yep. And then I'm looking, and then I stopped and I said, whoa, he's not going to be 17 wanting to talk to me forever. No. So I just took that moment and I said, okay, shut the laptop, look at my son and have this conversation. I didn't care about the topic, the political, whatever was happening, wherever that he wanted to talk about. That didn't matter. What mattered is my son wanted to talk to me. And so just to remind myself that, he's going to grow up and he's not going to want to always have those kind of conversations. So.
Yeah, I had that realization pretty, not recently. It started dawning on me when my son turned about 10 or 11, and I realized, oh my gosh, we don't have much time. Like we said we would travel with our kids, that we were unschooling and homeschooling because we really wanted to travel with our children, and we weren't traveling. And I felt like I wasn't being as present as I would like to be. And so what I've started doing is just putting them in the car once or twice a year. And we drive. We went 2 years ago to New Mexico and Arizona and saw the Grand Canyon and Colorado and drove across the country and back. And in a month, we're jumping in the car and we're going to Maine and Nova Scotia and Newfoundland looking for Vikings. And I, like Sabrina and like Lainey, I really find that it brings me to be very present with my children, to be with them in a new environment where it's new for everybody and where we're learning together what this new place is about and these new people and having to navigate the world together. It really has a way of refocusing priorities. And so, I mean, not everybody is privileged enough to be able to travel. And I am lucky that I can take my work and travel and go anywhere. I am a digital nomad in some ways. And I have purposefully made my life that way. And not everybody is as lucky. But I think even if you just take a day and go for a walk in the woods or a weekend and go camping, that it can really help realign priorities to get you outside of your day-to-day, who's doing the dishes, who's cooking the dinner, who's feeding the animals routine, to remind you to be present.
Yeah, I think that sounds really, I totally relate to what you just said. And also what Sheila talked about reminded me of animals, having pets actually. Kids can spend a long time and learn so much from being with pets. And we've had ducks, and my youngest daughter used to go into the backyard and just hang out with the ducks for hours. She knew those ducks so well. To anybody else, they looked identical, but she knew exactly who was who. She had relationships with all of them. She knew all their personalities. And she got that because she had the time. For me, the slowing down came with the homeschooling. When I started homeschooling my daughter, we started to do schoolwork because that's what I thought I was supposed to do. It didn't last very long at all. It was messing up our relationship and it wasn't fun. And so I realized that it was just a lot more fun if we just went to the park and hung out with the other families and just went to the beach and went to the library, which we did almost all the time. And that by doing that, she spent her own time on whatever she wanted to do, which was plenty of learning for a little kid. So it was the homeschooling that brought that to me. But the other piece, I feel like, for the kids with the slow homeschooling, is that they play a lot, and that's huge. They learn a lot from playing, and I feel like that sets an example for us too, because then we sort of go, well, you know what, this is really great, so we can play too. So the adults kind of do what they want to do. And I mean, when we talked about the book that Sophia and I wrote, I feel like a lot of the process of that, it was a continuation of what we'd been doing all these years. We just talked about it, we brainstormed, and Sophia hadn't written fiction before, and I'm always in my fiction writing groups, just anybody can write. It's like reading, it's natural, it's like breathing, you can do it. And it was just an extension of what we've been doing all these years, which is just living and pursuing our interests. And so I feel like I learned a lot of that from my kids, and the homeschooling that brought me to the slow homeschooling lifestyle, being present with them, trusting them, just gave me back so much in my own life, because I also got to see that there's so much as possible. People, I think, nowadays tend to feel like they don't have choices. And I feel, no matter what your situation, there's usually something you can do to change it. So for me, deciding to homeschool and letting go of the social message that this is what we're all supposed to do opened doors for so many other things. Because suddenly I realized I don't have to do things in the way that everybody thinks. I can do things differently. And that was really liberating. And it made me appreciate life a lot more too.
I think that's the point of all of this, is the ability to appreciate life. And we're going to go to break in just a second. But before we do, I want to say that I feel so personally honored that there are 3 moms here of grown homeschoolers, because it really, it illustrates the thought that time is fleeting, that if we fill it up with stuff that we're not passionate about, like schedules and work and producing and all of those other things, we're going to miss out on these wonderful childhoods that are so short. So I'm grateful that there are 3 mothers of grown homeschoolers here too, but that are still passionate about talking about the experience. So from a mentor perspective, I think it's really, really important that you are here. So I'm grateful. I just want to say that. We're going to take a quick break. We are going to come back and continue the conversation in just a few minutes. So stay tuned. So we hope that you enjoyed that video. We're going to continue the conversation, and while the break was running, sort of behind the scenes, we were talking, and the question came up for those that may be watching and slow education might be a new concept to them. Is there the belief that it has to be an either all or nothing? You have to homeschool or unschool in order, or even in my case, travel in order to slow down? Or are there other alternatives? I'd like to talk about, or I'd like to have the panel share all the different shades of slowing down and what that looks like for them. And I'm going to open up the floor to our panel and see what comes up, but see what your responses are.
Well, I feel like, I mean, even though we're talking about slow homeschooling, and I definitely feel like I lived that life with my kids, we're also I'm mostly a family of extroverts, and we like to do things. So by the time my kids were older, teenagers, they were very scheduled. They had had the experience of already pursuing their interests, and they developed interests and they wanted to pursue them. So they scheduled stuff. I feel like maybe the stuff that they knew, they had this sort of center that they had gained from having so much time when they were younger. So I don't think, they wouldn't get overwhelmed. They were just doing what they loved, and they could self-regulate. So if they maybe put too much on their plate, they might realize they did it, but then they would self-correct. So it's not like there's just this constant laid back, just slowness. We have a really busy life, everybody in our house now. Although my 18-year-old is the only one at home right now. And they're all doing stuff. So I guess it's sort of maybe thinking of it as they got this groundwork laid when they were younger of being able to really play and enjoy nature. I mean, being outside a lot and pursuing their interests, so that by the time they are older and they have these interests and they want to pursue them, they can self-regulate and they can go back and sort of to the well. Although, my daughter is the one who's a sophomore in college right now. As, being a freshman in college, yeah, it's really busy and overwhelming. She actually did a mindfulness retreat and kind of checked in again about those, those skills. And so she does that too. So it definitely isn't all or nothing, is what I've experienced.
I think for me, it's all about being authentic, rather than just like being all like zen and slow all the time. You can still be an extrovert. You can still like to do lots of things if you're being authentically you. I know that I think one thing parents it would do well to think about is, I think sometimes what happens is, you get married, you get your house, you have a baby, and you start settling down, and things slow down a little bit. And then you have that baby grow up a little bit and get to a certain point where maybe they want to do things faster than what mom does. They're like, I know, Mom, I know that we just went out yesterday and you want to stay home and hang the laundry and can your tomatoes, but I want to go out with my friends again. And I think that we need to be really careful that we honor our kids. Just because we've slowed down, that they're at a point where they might be at a point where they need to speed up a bit. And it's not speeding up as in lots of activities. When I think of slowness, it's being authentically them. They're going out into the world and exploring what they need to explore, which might be different than, we're just tired and we just want to stay home and relax. So I think that there's that aspect of it. And then if you're thinking of being authentic, what's authentic for one family and one person is going to be different for another family and another person. My concern about school and being authentic then is is a child being made to do things that are keeping them from being authentically themselves? Are they being forced to do homework that they really hate? Or are they being forced to attend a class they really hate? Or live a lifestyle that they don't, that keeps them from developing into who they are? So that could be a really big challenge from the way I define slow homeschooling.
Yeah, your kids are, like you said, such individual, unique people, and you have to honor them. What we have found in our family is that my kids will come to me and tell me when things are out of balance. So my daughter, who, read late, loved to play with stuffed animals, loved to be in nature, and is an introvert, she will tell me immediately if she feels overscheduled. She's like, it's too much. I can't do all this during the week. I don't have me time. I don't have my alone time. And she needs that to really refill her cup. My son, on the other hand, is about as extroverted as one can be. And he will tell me when he is not stimulated enough. And in fact, about the same time that my daughter came to me last year and said, we have to buckle down on this reading thing, Mom, he came to me and said, I need mentorships. I need to have work outside of the house that feels meaningful to me. And I want to explore this with other adults. And I want to do this, and you need to help me. I don't know how to find it. So he came to me and said, things are out of balance, Mom. I need more stimulation. So both of my children have learned to use that language with me to let me know when things aren't feeling right for them. And I think that I talked earlier about the communication and really constantly checking in. And this is their way. They will tell you when they need more or less. And that is so that you don't have to constantly be worrying about if you're not providing, or if you're providing too much, or if things are right. Like, they really will tell you. So.
I just wanted to comment back to the question of all or nothing kind of idea. I mean, I know, some people go to school and it works for them, presumably, but I think the question is, you have less control. So, you just have to, if you can find the balance that you want while that's part of your life, then maybe that can work for you. But I think when I talk to families that it's not working for, because when we work with the nonprofit that we started, we have a lot of people who are interested in homeschooling or taking their kids out of school, and it's usually because, it's not going so well. And a lot of times it's not just because the kid has to take a class that they don't like. It's because literally the kid is being told they're stupid, or, just some very damaging messages that they're getting from being in the situation. And also, as a librarian, a lot of times I saw little kids who are getting labeled, because they're being expected to read when they're 5, and they can't, they're developmentally not ready to do it yet. And the message is that they're stupid. And it also puts a big pressure on their parents, who are feeling they're failing them, that they're supposed to be able to read. And, so, if you're a kid who's going along and it's all working for you in school, then, possibly life at home can also be pleasant. But if you're in one of those situations, then I think it's pretty hard to find the balance at home where you're like, now let's observe our lovely child and enjoy this trusting relationship, because your kid is, in pain, and you want to help them, and it's really hard to help them when you're just not in control. That's just all there is to it. You're just not in control when they're in school all day. So, yeah. Sorry, sorry for that little. I've just seen it. I've seen it in real life. So, yeah, I think it's not always easy to do that.
You bring up an interesting point, Sophia. You talk about expectations, and expectations from an external perspective, but also Marie talked about it from her own, self-processing the external expectations and turning that into self-messages. And I think that can be damaging, but it also can be an opportunity to have more conversations, of course, with our children. What I want to talk about is there a balance between expectations, external expectations, internal expectations, and goals? Can kids still be goal-oriented and put those expectations on themselves? I'm not talking about the ones where other people are telling them what to do, but can they do that and still respect natural flow and a natural kind of slow learning that we're talking about? Does anybody want to comment on that?
I would say absolutely yes. My original, what I said when I said how I see slow learning or whatever, it's whatever works for the individual. And I think Sheila sort of is echoing that too. So if they set goals for themselves and then they carry them out at their own pace. They can decide whether they want to meet that goal in a week or a year, or whether they want it to be open-ended. I've definitely observed my kids, their set goals, all of them, and sometimes they change course. That's the other thing. We've talked a lot about that, quitting. There's this bias against quitting that we have in our culture, that it's a bad thing, because we see quitting as negative, but maybe it's just changing course, and it doesn't mean at all that nothing has been learned. A lot could have been learned even if someone quits. So I would say absolutely, and maybe just the freedom to do that, to quit, is part of what makes it sort of fall in line with the being present and being mindful, because they don't feel, no one's forcing them. It's their own choice. They're pursuing these things because they want to. So, and for, as my kids get older, when they're adults, obviously they have to have responsibilities. They have to do things that they don't want to do, but they gain an understanding of the reason that they're doing them, and they have so even if they don't love everything they're doing, even if they might have to take a class or get a job or do some task that they don't totally love, they know why they're doing it. It's not arbitrary, and they're still making the choice to do it. So I think that pretty much makes all the difference.
Yeah, I love the idea of it's okay to quit, because I know my grandson for a while took some karate lessons, and he stopped wanting to go. So my daughter went to the instructor and said, he's going to take a break. He's not wanting to do this. And his answer to her was, you shouldn't let him quit, because then he'll grow up and think it's okay to quit his job. And I heard the story, and I'm like, at the time, my husband had just quit his job that he had been in for over 20 years. He didn't like his job. It was stressful for him. It was not who he was at all. And finally, after all these years of raising our children, telling our children, be who you are and do what you want to do with your life, my husband finally had gotten the courage to quit his job, and we were developing businesses, family businesses in our house, and it was the best thing that ever happened to him. And I'm like, well, I hope if my grandson finds himself in a job that isn't working for him, that he quits it, and he does what he wants to do with his life. And so, the ability to quit when it's not right for you is so important. And going along with the whole idea of, having a business, that usually, a lot of, Peter Gray did the study of the survey of grown unschoolers and found that a huge percentage of them end up owning their own business, being in business for themselves instead of going to a job they hate, and let me tell you, being in business for yourself is a lot of work, and you have to do things you don't want to do sometimes. I don't want to sit down and figure out my taxes. I don't want to, do these reports, and I really don't. I hate taxes. but there are things that you have to do, but you know why you're doing them. Just like Nova said, you know what you want to do. You know why you want to do it. And so you know that what you're doing is going to take you to an end goal. So it's still living your authentic self. It's not, it's not doing what someone else wants you to do?
This was actually probably our biggest doubt throughout unschooling, because as we're unschooling, there was no doubt that our daughter would be able to curate the education that she was looking for, even within herself, or socialize, or those kinds of things. But the question we were kept kind of circling around was, but what about the sort of sometimes the grit that you need to kind of stick with something to, get it? Because if the idea of unschooling is also that you can kind of be self-directed, what is that internal motivation going to look like to say, I want to do this enough that I'm going to stick through it when it's hard? And so we were kind of just analyzing that. And in some ways, it's funny. It's almost like we were rushing the process without going through it, because she was itty bitty. I think she was like 2 years old when we were having this conversation. So we're having conversations about a grit for a 2-year-old. But now at 6 even, I would say that this, over time, this one concern about kind of what's that doubt about trusting your kids, it just melts away over time, because I see even at 6, just the little things that, where she demonstrates again. And I think the big difference is that these are her goals. When it's her goal, it's not, do I have grit or not? It's, that's what I want to do. That's what I want to accomplish. And that's so different than the thinking of, oh, I have a goal for my daughter, but is she really going to stick with that? Is she really going to accomplish that? And so I think that's a huge, huge difference, is that she has ownership over what it is that she is striving toward. And, as Nova and Sheila were saying, just that internal motivation is truly compelling. And at the end of the day, is telling you, this is why I'm moving through hoops. So back to the the broader point of, if you're receiving messages about other people's goals as metrics for whether or not you're succeeding or whatnot, that's kind of a dangerous place to be. To measure yourself along other people's goals rather than your own. And so in some ways, it's sort of like that voice we were talking about within ourselves. It's giving that room and space for that voice in tiny, tiny children to be able to listen to that already.
Yeah, definitely. I think that one of the things is just to realize that, children, this is their life, right? Even when they're 2 or when they're 6, and for them to be able to have that autonomy is, why shouldn't they? And then I don't know if it's a function of that, but I definitely see my kids, they seem to make more goals for themselves than I ever have. I mean, even than I do now. I notice it. It's something they talk about. They're conscious of it. And the grit, 100%. The thing is that they have that is just a confidence in themselves. They just are confident. If they want to learn something, they're going to. They've never been told they can't. It just doesn't even cross their mind. So, and obviously, there's things that are very important to them, and they stick with it if it's hard. I mean, any number of things. I can't even tell you. Just they, in their life. So yeah, definitely. I mean, I know, it's good to see it in your own kid, but just looking back and seeing them now as adults, definitely can be done for sure. I think it's the difference between making your own goals and deciding how you want to learn yourself and having it all decided for you and put on you, which is, and then, it's the same old thing, you learn for the test and then you forget it and so on. So my thoughts.
Yeah, I totally relate to that. The thing of my kids having way more goals than I ever really could. I feel like that I had a lot more in the way. And that's, I think, a lot of what we're talking about is just sort of getting out of their way, and I also love what Sabrina said about ownership. I feel like I've witnessed that a lot too, and it's so amazing when they own their own stuff. And it just makes me think of one example of my youngest daughter when she was 13, and she's the introvert of the family too. So, but she really she got into she's into theater, even though she's an introvert, and she just came to me when she was 13 and said, I want to do a production of Hamlet in the backyard. And I said, okay. And I never really thought it would happen, which I guess is my bad, but she did it. And she went and she got her friends together and she put this whole production on, and she's done at least a dozen productions since then. And just today, in fact, they were in my living room rehearsing As You Like It, and they own these productions completely. There is the extent of the adult involvement is like we sell refreshments at the productions. And it's so valuable and amazing. And just think about like having that kind of ownership of what you're doing when you're a kid and when you're a teenager, to carry that forward. I can't think of anything better you could give your kid. Really.
Yeah, thank you for that. It brings up something inside of me that I want, it's inspired by the quitting conversation that you've been having, but I want to take it somewhere else. But first, before I do that, I have to just tell you the quick quitting story on our side. So my son wanted to learn juggling. So I was like, great, I support you, great. I bought the juggling pins, and we got a private juggling teacher, and he's doing the juggling. And then he decides he doesn't want to do it anymore. And I'm not happy because I just paid for these juggling, pins, and that was my thinking. So I want to talk about my thinking in the next, not me, I don't want you to analyze me, but what I want to talk about is how we as parents make mistakes and what it means to repair after those mistakes. But I do want to tell you, so the juggling story was, Miro was maybe 14 or 15, and last year he wanted to do something else, and he wanted to learn how to play the lyre, and I was like, okay, great. And he said to me this time, but you're not buying it for me. I'm going to raise the money. I'm going to do this, this, and this, and start an online business so I can have this instrument custom made. And he did what he said he was going to do. And so he had this lyre made for him last year, and now he's got the lyre, and guess what? He's playing it. And he doesn't have a teacher. He doesn't have a mentor. There's no online classes for learning how to play a little hand lyre, hand harp. He's self-directing his learning how to do this. And not too long ago, I asked him, what was the difference between, not quitting, the juggling and the lyre? He said, well, I'm interested in this, but also I paid for it. And that to him made a difference. So what I want to talk about now, I can, sitting here in this seat, I have that reflection. I didn't have the reflection before about the lyre. But what I want to ask this panel is, how do you make repairs when you as the parent find that you are fallible, that find that you do mistakes, and find that some of your programming is not deprogrammed yet? How do you, and I know Marie talked in a great deal about the communication in her family, but what does that look like when you're not living from that internal knowing that Sabrina was talking about, and you're living with somebody else's expectations, and that programming creeps in again and disrupts part of your slow education in your family? So I'm just going to update this question.
As you're describing that, I'm thinking, what a beautiful gift in a way. So kind of spinning the challenges that we have as adults have as really beautiful gifts, because if our children are thinking that at one point you're going to magically have all of the answers, then those expectations are going to fall flat on their face and leave them with a whole nother slew of challenges to work through. And I think it also sets the stage for, in that gift, being able to say, I'm still learning. I'm still figuring this out. And I want to, whether it's saying, I don't know the answer to something, or whether it's saying, I messed up, I'm really sorry. Those are really powerful things to be able to say to your children, and to showcase and model that you are life learning, that learning, there's no kind of, oh, got there. It's just always happening and always evolving. And I feel like that, if we talk about at the end of the day, the relationships and the connectedness that we have with our family and with our community as being paramount, that how deep is that connection when you can be raw and open with each other and say, I don't know, I'm sorry. Those are really powerful ways to connect with one another. So that's where I'd put those in the category of.
My son, when he was younger, was into Cub Scouts, and he was so into getting all these pins and rewards that he actually won every academic. He earned every academic and sports pin in Cub Scouts. And then he moved into Boy Scouts, and he said, I am going to earn every possible badge, and I'm going to, which is a huge fee. And I was supporting him in that and taking him to the different workshops and helping him do all the badges. And in spite of being, this radical unschooler who was always talking about, we don't need external rewards and stuff, I was really proud that I was going to have this kid that I could, because everyone says, does unschooling work? Do your kids, do they go to college? Are they able to do, things? So I was going to have Eagle Scout who learned every possible badge. Look what my kid could do as an unschooler. Look what it does, And then he quit, right? And part of me, I accepted it. I'm like, that's fine. All of a sudden I asked, well, why did you quit? And he said, all these things that I'm doing, why would I need external rewards to do them? And I'm like, oh, you've been listening to your mother, right? But still, in spite of, he's my youngest child, I have gone through this with all my other kids, and I believe firmly, you don't need to brag about your kids. You don't need the honor rolls and the medals and every, I thought I was going to have bragging rights. And those of us most of us were raised in very mainstream society, and it's huge, and this is the first time we're doing it, right? So we're going to learn along the way, and if in order to learn from our mistakes, we've got to make mistakes sometimes, just like our kids. Our kids are going to make mistakes all the time, and they're going to learn from them, but in order to learn from them, they have to have made the mistakes, and it's just going to happen.
So I can go back to the story that I told earlier about my daughter coming to me and saying, Mom, I'm in a really bad place right now with my reading. And not only did I quit everything, I realized that I made some mistakes. And I made mistakes of slowing down and watching her, but I made some mistakes in my assumptions about how reading and learning can happen, even as an unschooler, that just if I left her alone, she'd be fine. And that's usually fine, except she's very severely dyslexic. And I had not really picked up on it. And she also had some vision issues. She needed bifocals. And so when I was able to really settle down and concentrate on her and what her needs were, I realized that these things were going on and that I had made a big mistake, especially in the vision thing, in not attending to it earlier. We had her eyes tested, but she needs for reading, for up close, she needed bifocals, and the testing had always been at a distance. And so just because I had not been attentive and had been doing everything else for my community and for activism and work and my husband's accident, I had not attended to these issues. And I had to really apologize to her that this was my fault. I had not seen these issues. And and we talked about the dyslexia. Her father has mild dyslexia and her grandmother. And so it was glaringly obvious that this could be a possibility. But in my trust that my children would learn when it was time for them to learn, which they do, I had just let it slide. And what she needed actually was attention, and she needed attention in a very specific way. And so I was actually able to repair the damage. It wasn't a damage to our relationship, but it was a damage to her self-esteem. So we did a lot of reading and research on dyslexia and people in history who've had dyslexia, especially Leonardo da Vinci, which she is very impressed that she has something in common with him, and he's an artist like she is. And now she has embraced that she has this difference, and that a lot of people have learning differences. We all learn differently in different ways. And now herself, it's actually turned it around. She now sees her learning as something very special. And so I was able to repair it by focusing attention on it, apologizing for my part in not recognizing how it was hurting her in her social sphere, and then saying, okay, what can we do now to make this better? And but yeah, like just continuing to talk with her and making sure that she understands that everyone learns differently and that it's okay. And I think that a lot can be repaired once we have those discussions with our children, that just because they quit something doesn't mean they're a failure. Just because they are learning something slower than their school peers doesn't mean they're a failure. And these kinds of conversations happen over and over and over again in our own minds and in their minds. And as long as we're talking together, I think a lot can be solved that way.
That was a powerful response, Marie. Thank you so much for chiming in. And yeah, we do make mistakes. And I think, that's just part of it. And I think everybody on this panel, we're all unschoolers. I don't think anybody on this panel actually follows a curriculum. So there's a different level, I think, to the learning, the trust that we're talking about. And sometimes it's hard to see the forest for the trees. I could tell you, I could fill up the rest of the hour with all the mistakes I've made, but I feel human, and that to me is the important thing. What I want to talk about next is I want to shift gears just a little bit and talk about the learning. We're talking about slow learning, and most of the time when people are addressing learning, they're talking about education in a very specific way. Generally, it's defined as quote-unquote academics. So we can define that within the subjects that we're all familiar with in academics. I'd like to actually open this up to the panel and ask you to share with us not the academic learning, but maybe the social learning or the grit or the soft skills that you see being part of the learning process of yourself and your family, your children, or your older children, if the case may be. They're adults now. What did that look like? And what did they get from the slow learning that perhaps they may have not been able to get from maybe a conventional setting? We'll go back to Marie.
The one thing I really love about the way that our life is structured outside of school is that my kids spend a lot of time with children of different ages. So my son is an actor. He's been acting since he was 6 at a local repertory theater that he loves, and he's actually interning there this year. And his friends and his social group are children who are younger than he is, because he's facilitating a children's play for younger children, and also the older fellows who work at the theater and learn theater through participating and living at the theater. And so and for both of my children, my daughter as well, my daughter has a friend who lives down the street that she rides her bike down, and he's 7, she's 11. And because she's right on the cusp of in tweendom, where she's, experimenting with makeup and she got her nose pierced, but yet she really wants to play in imaginary play, and her girlfriends don't want to do that anymore. So what has been really beautiful for me outside of sort of academics or learning math or reading or whatever is that my children know how to be with children, adults, teens, people of all ages in a real cooperative way to get their needs met. And I think that's really, that's a life skill. And it's not one that I learned until I was, even in graduate school, I had not learned that because I was still really in that school mindset. It wasn't until I was in my late 30s or 40s that I learned that. And so outside of the academic learning is this deep love of people of all ages of how they can get their needs met and their need for community met through these people of different ages.
Something comes to mind when you ask that question. My two kids, my daughter's the younger, and she was very, very social person. And at the age of 6, she sat me down one night getting ready for bed, and she said, Mommy, I wouldn't want to be cool. And I was like, well, why not? And she says, because if you're cool, then people are afraid to come up to you and be friends with you. And I was like, oh, wow, okay, she's got it figured out. Like, she just had everything figured out at a very early age. My son, on the other hand, was way more introverted and shy. And I don't know what would have happened if he had gone to school. I don't know. He didn't. So he stuck really close to me. We would go to the park every week, and all the kids would be playing games, and he was always the observer. And would watch everything that was happening, and he always knew who everyone was, and he carefully watched interactions, but a lot of times he didn't take part in it. And then I remember one time kids came and they're all getting some game together, and they're like, do you want to play? And he's like, no, because I knew he wanted to watch first. And then the game was underway and he wanted to play then, and of course it was kind of too late. The teams had been picked, and so it was just like I was watching him figure out this social thing that, maybe you have to be a little uncomfortable, but put your foot in, but he was probably 8 at the time, and he was just figuring that stuff out. And just that kind of thing of being able to see him unfold on that level, his pace was way slower than my daughter's for figuring out that social interaction stuff. That lifestyle allowed him to do it in his own way so that he wasn't rushed, and have to report, he has figured it all out now by the age of 27. He seems to be okay. So I was very grateful for that for him.
Yeah, that natural pacing feels so important, that, each child is so different in what they're, how they're ticking, how they're processing everything is so different. So that, I think, is such a beautiful benefit to this lifestyle. And Marie, what you were saying too about the different ages. Oh, I see that from little kids up to adults. And I actually was, I kid you not, at a baby shower the other day where my daughter was with me, and another mom said, are you a homeschooling parent? The way your daughter was talking to me, I have to ask. And I said, well, yeah. She said, me too. And she was like, just the way that she was interacting with her. And I thought that was interesting that you could spot it. But I think for me, with my daughter still being on the younger end, one of the things that I find to be fun is spotting all of the ways that you can see learning in your day. And I mean, they just like from the moment you get up till the moment you go to bed, you can see learning all the time. But really, and that's not related to the age, that can happen all the time, but specifically related to her age, a lot of the play-based learning. And like someone was saying before about how that's inspiring as an adult to kind of reintroduce play to your life. But that was a really compelling reason for us in terms of, one of many seeking alternative educational approaches, because we wanted to really protect that ability for our daughter's day to be filled with play, and to process things through play, and so while she is doing a lot of the play-based learning, I think that is really special. There's a lot of her day that's, in imagination, in her imaginary world, and that I couldn't be more grateful for. And I think for me, some of that trust, going back to that trust, was thinking about learning as all expansive, all encompassing. So I'm sure there might be some parents out there who are seeing their child playing, but perhaps also thinking, but I've got to balance that with the learning, either their homework or their things. And I suppose I removed that anxiety from myself, and it feels so freeing to be able to just watch and enjoy the learning that is happening all the time, whether it's interpersonal or just through their play, or that you can pretty much at any given time look and say, what is my child doing? What are they even learning right now? And there's usually something that can fill in the blank. And so that, I think, can be empowering as a parent who may be wondering, oh, do I need to switch things? Do I need to maybe get back to something that reads more like learning?
Yeah, to follow up on that, definitely, I know what you mean. You can definitely spot when a kid comes and starts talking to you and having a conversation. There's just that they're a homeschooler, because they just have that confidence, and they talk to you as if they're your equal, and they're not afraid to speak to you just because you're an adult. It's great. I love that about homeschool kids. And one of the things that my kids have that I didn't have at their age, as young adults even, is that they know themselves. They know themselves very well. They know what they like. They might not know what they want to do for the rest of their lives, but they know what they want to be doing now. They know what they want to be doing tomorrow. They know who they are and what they like and what they don't like. And, as a kid, I was, I did what I needed to do to please my teachers, to get good grades, to please my parents. And then when I became a parent, in the beginning, all I did was, I have to be a good parent now. What do I need to do to be a good parent? And in one of the unschooling forums that I used to visit a lot, someone challenged everybody to set a good example to your kids of pursuing your own passions. And I was like, and discovering, what do I like and what am I into? And that that 3 selves so well, and that's
Well, what comes to mind for me in this discussion, one thing that comes to mind for me is all the things that my kids learned that I had no idea that they were learning. So we talk about how do you know they're learning and observing their learning, and we do that, but they're constantly surprising you with the things that they know that you didn't know they knew, or you didn't know how they learned about. My son, when he was a teenager, became obsessed with mustelids, which is, I didn't know what they were until he became obsessed with them. It's basically the weasel family. And I don't even know how he found that out. I have no idea. But he was really into them for a long time. And he would go to the library and get books about weasel. I mean, it was an obsession. And then it evolved into an obsession with bird watching. And, I'm sure we all have examples of this, of our kids having in-depth knowledge of something, and we didn't really know that they were pursuing this, or that they knew that. And the other thing that I think about with this is, so we talk about the hard skills, soft skills, whatever, academics, but there's also learning styles. And my son that I was just talking about, he was a very hands-on learner. So he wasn't going to really learn very well in an academic environment. He went to college for 2 years and then he quit and went to pursue what he wanted to do. But his learning style was going out in the world. When he learned about bird watching, he did it by, hanging out with bird watchers and meeting all the senior citizens and going out with them on weekends. And they loved it because his vision was a lot better than theirs. And they also loved it because they had a young person who cared about what they had to say. So he was just much more of a direct learner. And I think that that's something that schools, it's very hard for schools to accommodate the way individuals learn, but we get to do that, which is really awesome.
Yeah, this has been an incredible conversation, and it blows me away that 2 hours almost have flown by already. We just have time now to go around to each of our panelists and ask you to share any closing thoughts. Closing thoughts are basically, if somebody is interested in slow learning, it's that last bit of information or that last piece of advice that you would give to them, to help them ease into slow education or slow homeschooling. So final thoughts, and when you're done with your final thought, please share any projects and websites that you are working on. And I will remind our audience to go to the show notes page to get the links. So why don't we go back to Milva real fast, closing thoughts and what you're working on now.
Well, my closing thoughts and what I would say is don't be flexible. Don't get locked into something that a particular way you think you're supposed to do anything. Just find what works for you and your family. And for projects, I have a blog, apotlucklife.com, and the book that I wrote with Sophia, which is Unschoolers, which has a website, unschoolersbook.com, which sort of demonstrates the lifestyle that we've been talking about. Thank you.
Thank you, Milva. And Sabrina, why don't you go next?
Great. I think for anyone out there who is feeling drawn in by the idea of slow anything, just know it is possible. You don't have to be busy. You can minimize your life if you want to. Sometimes it takes just a matter of thinking, I can do that. Not even knowing how you will do that, but just knowing you can, and you can figure it out for sure. And there's lots of help along the way. You're not alone on this journey. So so follow your heart if that's what it's telling you. And in terms of projects, I am a photographer, a family photographer at Outdoor Family Photography, and I am a co-founder of the site Forest School for All, which helps families to start forest play communities in their local woods. And I have also a very dusty but well-loved blog called Family and Footprints that was following our travels while we were trying to what I kind of called, finding and creating our own new American dream, which for us did look very slow and adventurous in big and simple ways. So if you are curious about how you could go from not living that way to living that way, I did share a lot of that there. Thanks.
My last thoughts would be that all of this sounds harder than it is, and that in some ways the constant reevaluation of whether your life is working for you is perhaps a life skill that all of us, no matter if we're unschooling or living a life anywhere in the world, that the constant reevaluation of whether our journey is a satisfying one, is working for everybody in our immediate family and in our extended family, like really having those conversations with ourselves on a fairly regular basis, even if you have to put a note in your calendar to spend a day, have a group meeting, think about and reevaluate whether things are working. I think that it gets lost. It ggets pushed down as something that you can do later, that maybe next week, maybe next weekend, but it really should be a priority. Well, I really want to do away with the shoulds. That making it a priority has gifts in your life beyond just paring down the schedule. Because we're all growing and changing. I'm 50 this year. I'm not the person I was when I was 30 or 40 even. And it's required a constant renegotiation in my marriage, with my children, with my family, my parents who are getting older. And it's important to do that work. Projects. Well, I have a blog. It's called Personal Mycology, and I do write about unschooling and our life in unschooling more from a theoretical standpoint rather than a day-to-day standpoint. I'm writing a book of fiction, historical fiction, and I don't have anything up on the internet yet. I'm actually going away this Friday for a week-long writing retreat, trying to get a manuscript together by the end of the summer. But yeah, I guess my blog, Personal Mycology, that would be my main contribution.
I want to say thank you for having me tonight. And I guess I would just encourage anyone who maybe is feeling frustrated in a situation that things aren't working to just try a change, especially if it's something about, maybe taking your kid out of school. You can always put them back in. So I've never heard anyone say they regretted trying it, even if it's just for a few months. And as far as projects, I gotta say the book Unschoolers that Melva and I wrote, it was a great experience for me. As she pointed out, it was kind of a experience for me to do. That was definitely a culmination of having lived that way with my kids. And I mean, they would have killed me if I hadn't given it a shot. So it was really fun to do it, and hope you guys will maybe read it. Okay, thanks a lot.
I think the most important thing to remember is that it's okay to be who you are, and it's okay for your kids to be who they are. It's just okay. We don't need to change ourselves. We don't need to change our kids. We're just perfect the way we are. And I blog at www.sheilabaranowski.com. And I'm working on a picture book, which I hope to have out pretty soon. I'm pretty excited about it. So that's my, that's my most recent project.
Thank you, everybody. I just wanted to say with a very full heart, thank you. It's been an honor being on this panel with you and hosting these conversations. So thank you. I learned a lot. I also want to say thank you to Anne, who produced the show. She put together a fantastic panel. And thank you to Mel and Biggie over at the Conscious Consumer Network. And as always, we are so incredibly grateful for providing this platform for us to share these thoughts and have these conversations and discussions. So thank you. Also a very heartfelt thanks. Wherever you are, whatever you do, continue to always do it for the love of learning.
If we want to change the world, we must first change the media. Mainstream media exists for the purposes of indoctrination and manipulation of public perception. The world of free and independent media is growing, and with the upsurge in information now available in the public domain, it has never been easier to access free and independent media. The exploration of this information resulted in an experimental project which would provide a fully supported space for researchers, whistleblowers, and seekers of all kinds to express themselves and educate the world. On the 1st of January 2015, Conscious Consumer Network was launched to the world. Nobody thought we would make it this far, but CCN is the longest running free and independent media network of its kind. CCN is a unique collaboration of hearts and souls, bringing you information from different perspectives to educate and inform. Since we started CCN, we have had only one desire: the pursuit of a free, fair, just, sustainable world, and this has not changed. Having overcome many challenges over the last 2 years, CCN is here to stay, and we've got great things lined up for 2017. Help keep CCN on the air by supporting the 2017 Network Support Fund.